Today, we are going to learn some hand sewing. You will need some needles and thread. If you're doing a project that requires strength, such as buttonholes, there is also silk buttonhole twist. This is the strongest of strong threads. This is the thread that you probably can't pull apart by yourself without the assistance of some scissors. So today I've got two different types of buttons with me, and each of these get sewn on slightly differently. It's super simple, both of the processes for these. It will take you 2 seconds and it will improve your life tenfold. Here, first of all, we've got what's called a shank button, which has got this little bit coming off the back of it, which means that it stands up. There are no holes in the top. It's purely decorative on the outside, but the stitching actually happens on the back of the button. Alternatively, you've got your classic button with holes. Let's begin with the shank button. I'm threading my needle double because buttons tend to need to take quite a lot of strain and might as well have a nice strong thread. The first thing to do is to anchor your thread. This is on the back of the garment, so not the side of the garment that's going to have the button sewn onto it. Make sure both of those tail ends of the thread get pulled through, and this is why it's important to make sure that both of those tails match up evenly when you thread your needle. That way one end of the tail isn't pulling out the other end just when the other end of the tail is only just disappearing. So I'm taking one back stitch just in place. I personally prefer to use the method that puts a knot into the stitch on the back, purely because this is a bit more secure than simply back stitching. And also because this is the underside of the garment, it's not going to be seen. Once that has happened, I can just stick my needle just at the base of that knot, bring it up to the other side of the material, which this is the correct side. This is the outside of your garment where you need to put your button back on. Slide the shank of your button just over that needle and pull it through. The needle should then just enter immediately next to the exit point of the thread. That gets pulled through, securing that button into place. And you want to pull this fairly securely because these shank buttons do have this bulk on the back. If they are loosely sewn on, they will just sort of flop over and not be very interesting. So make sure it's pulled relatively tightly. Then it's just a matter of securing this a couple of times just to make sure that that is super secure, which you can actually do now in one single swoop, inserting your needle just at the back here, making sure that is going through the hole of the shank, pulling that through, and then sending that just back through to the other side. If you're doing this with a silk buttonhole twist or a thicker thread, then you may only need to go through 3 or 4 times, but if you're using a thinner thread like I am here, you may need to go through 6 or 7 times to get it nice and securely pinned down. You've decided that your button is complete. Back through to the back side of the material, just take a couple of back stitches in place, and you can knot these if you feel like being super secure. If you're working through several layers of material, you can simply send that needle in, through only between that one layer of material out somewhere in the yonders of irrelevancy, and clip that into nothingness. That way you've got a nice finished little stitch on the underside and you've got a completed button on the outside. If you've got a button with holes in it, this one works relatively similarly to the shank button, but there's one additional little step that we need to take here. So once again, we're going to begin our stitch with an anchor. I have once again also double threaded this thread here. I'm going to send my needle from the back up through to the front of my garment, just where the button should be positioned. And I'm going to make sure that that needle goes through one hole of the button. Now here's where you get to decide whether you want your stitches to be up and down or side to side. Doesn't really matter which is which. I'm going to go side to side just because. So I'm going to send that needle down through. Now, for this one, you don't want to pull it super, super tight. And we'll explain why a little bit more in a bit. But just pull it so that that thread lies flat, but is not extremely pinned down super firmly to the fabric. From the back of the material, come up through this hole again, down through this hole, and I'm going to repeat this about 3 or 4 times. Again, fewer times if you are using a thicker thread. Once you've achieved that, you can come up now through the upper hole and once again down through that second hole. Once you have repeated the same number of stitches on this row as you have on the bottom row, you want to bring your needle from the back up to the front, just at the base of where all this stitching is. But you don't want to come up through any holes. You want to come up sort of just under the button there. Bring the thread up. Now, wrap that thread a couple of times very tightly around the base of that button. Because this button does not have a shank, it is flat, unlike the shank button, which comes with a little bit of that three-dimensionality. This button will need a little bit of a lift to keep it off the ground fabric so that there's a little bit of room for your garment to sit between the button and the fabric. Once you've wrapped that around a couple of times, just at the base of that massive thread under the button, send your needle back down through to the underside. And finish off your thread.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe to stay up to date on all of our latest videos.